The whispers followed Tessa Langley like a shadow as she carried her 9-month-old son Samuel through the dusty main street of Laredo, Texas. It was 1875, and the scorching summer sun beat down mercilessly on her faded calico dress as she clutched her precious bundle closer to her chest, trying to shield him from both the heat and the judgmental stares of the townsfolk. "There she goes again," Tessa overheard Mrs. Holbrook mutter to the general store owner as she passed. "Poor child born in sin. No father to speak of. Shameful business." Tessa lifted her chin and quickened her pace. The weight of her situation pressed down on her shoulders more heavily than the basket of mending she carried in her free arm. At 22, she had already weathered more storms than most women twice her age. The small room she rented above the laundry where she worked barely fit a bed and a crib, but it was all she could afford since her parents had turned their backs on her when she refused to give up her baby. She had come to Laredo 8 months ago, heavily pregnant and desperate for a new beginning. Mrs. Wilson, the aging owner of the laundry, had been the only one willing to hire her. The old woman didn't ask questions about Tessa's past or the absence of a wedding ring on her finger. She only needed someone with strong arms and a stronger work ethic. "Mama," Samuel cooed, reaching up to touch her face with his chubby fingers. "Yes, my love," Tessa whispered, kissing his forehead. "We'll be just fine, you and me." As she approached the laundry, she spotted an unfamiliar horse tied to the hitching post outside. It was a magnificent chestnut stallion with a white blaze down its face, its saddle well worn but clearly of quality craftsmanship. A stranger in town, then. Tessa sighed. New people meant new judgments, new whispers. The bell above the door jingled as she entered the laundry. Mrs. Wilson stood behind the counter, conversing with a tall man whose broad shoulders were accentuated by a dusty leather vest over a once white shirt. His dark hair curled at the nape of his neck beneath a well-used Stetson. "Ah, Tessa," Mrs. Wilson called out. "Come meet our new customer. Mr. Miles Lawson just rode into town yesterday. He's taking over the old Davidson ranch." The man turned, and Tessa found herself looking into the most startling blue eyes she had ever seen. They crinkled at the corners as he smiled and tipped his hat. "Madam," he said, his voice deep and warm like honey over gravel. "Pleasure to meet you." Tessa shifted Samuel to her hip and nodded politely, unprepared for the way the stranger's gaze softened as it fell on her son. "And who might this little cowboy be?" he asked, gently touching the brim of an imaginary hat toward Samuel. "This is my son, Samuel," Tessa replied, the defensive note in her voice impossible to miss. She waited for the familiar shift in expression, the subtle withdrawal that invariably followed when unmarried mothers were identified. But Miles Lawson's smile only widened as Samuel reached toward him with curious fingers. "Well, howdy there, partner," he said, offering his finger for Samuel to grasp. "That's quite a grip you've got," Mrs. Wilson chuckled. "Mr. Lawson was just bringing in some linens and shirts." Said his bachelor skills with a washboard leave much to be desired. "I can ruin a perfectly good shirt faster than a man can draw his pistol," Miles admitted with a self-deprecating laugh. "Figured I'd better leave it to the professionals before I'm reduced to wearing potato sacks." Despite herself, Tessa felt a smile tugging at her lips. "We should be able to handle that for you, Mr. Lawson." "Much obliged," he said, his eyes lingering on her face for a moment too long before he turned back to Mrs. Wilson. "I'll be back on Friday then, if that suits." "We'll have everything ready," the older woman assured him. Miles nodded, then tipped his hat once more to Tessa and Samuel. "You take care now, madam. You too, little man." As the door closed behind him, Tessa released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Handsome devil, isn't he?" Mrs. Wilson remarked with a knowing glance. And he didn't even flinch when he saw Samuel. That's rare enough in these parts. It doesn't matter, Tessa replied, setting down her basket. Men like that aren't for women like me. Mrs. Wilson's weathered face softened. Don't be so quick to sort folks into boxes, child. Sometimes life surprises you. Tessa merely shook her head and set Samuel down on his blanket in the corner where he could play with his wooden blocks while she worked. She had no room in her life for foolish dreams or handsome cowboys with kind eyes. Experience had taught her that lesson all too well. The week passed in its usual rhythm of hard work and sleepless nights as Samuel cut another tooth. By Friday, Tessa had nearly forgotten about Miles Lawson until the bell above the door announced his return. "Afternoon, ladies," he called cheerfully, stamping the dust from his boots at the threshold. His gaze immediately found Tessa, who was folding sheets at the back table. "Mrs. Wilson emerged from the back room, wiping her hands on her apron. "Right on time, Mr. Lawson. Your things are all ready." While Mrs. Wilson gathered his laundry, Miles wandered over to where Samuel sat playing on his blanket. The boy looked up at the tall stranger and offered a drool-covered wooden horse. "Is that for me?" Miles asked, crouching down to the child's level. "Why, thank you kindly, sir. That's mighty generous." Tessa watched, wary yet fascinated, as the cowboy accepted the toy with the same solemn gravity one might receive a precious gift. "You've got a fine boy there, Miss Langley," Miles said, glancing up at her. "Friendly little fellow." "He doesn't know yet that he should be cautious around strangers," Tessa replied, unable to keep the edge from her voice. Miles studied her for a moment, his blue eyes serious. "Some strangers are worth getting to know, Miss Langley." Before she could respond, Mrs. Wilson returned with his neatly wrapped package. Miles reluctantly handed the wooden horse back to Samuel, who immediately put it in his mouth. "What do I owe you?" Miles asked, reaching for his wallet. As Mrs. Wilson named the price, Miles counted out the coins and then added an extra $1. "For the excellent service," he said with a wink that made the older woman blush like a schoolgirl. "Will you be needing our services regularly, Mr. Lawson?" Mrs. Wilson inquired. "I believe I will," he answered, his gaze sliding toward Tessa once more. "In fact, I was wondering if either of you ladies might know someone willing to help out at the ranch a few days a week. The place needs a woman's touch, and my cooking skills are even worse than my laundering abilities." Mrs. Wilson shook her head regretfully. "I'm afraid I can't spare Tessa here, and most of the other women in town are spoken for in one way or another." "That's a shame," Miles said, genuine disappointment in his voice. Then he brightened. "What about Sundays? Do you work Sundays, Miss Langley?" Tessa blinked, caught off guard. "No, I don't. But then perhaps you might consider helping me just one day a week. I'd pay fair wages, of course, and the little one would be welcome too." The offer was tempting. Tessa's finances were always stretched thin, and extra income would mean more security for Samuel. Still, she hesitated. "I don't think that would be proper, Mr. Lawson." "Miles, please," he corrected gently. "And as for proper, I assure you my intentions are honorable. I simply need help getting the house in order and perhaps a decent meal that doesn't taste like leather." Mrs. Wilson chuckled. "You could do worse than Tessa's cooking, Mr. Lawson. She makes a rabbit stew that would make a man weep with gratitude." Tessa shot her employer a betrayed look, but Mrs. Wilson merely shrugged. "It's good money, child, and the Lord knows you could use it." After a moment of internal struggle, Tessa sighed. "I suppose I could come this Sunday, just to see what needs to be done." Miles's face lit up with a smile that made something flutter in Tessa's chest. "That would be mighty appreciated. I'll send my wagon for you around 8 if that's agreeable." Unable to find a reasonable objection, Tessa nodded. "Very well, Mr. Lawson." "Miles," he reminded her, tipping his hat. "And thank you, Miss Langley. I'll see you Sunday morning." As promised, a wagon arrived outside Tessa's small room precisely at 8 o'clock on Sunday. Samuel was already wide awake and full of energy, bouncing on Tessa's hip as she descended the stairs to find Miles himself holding the reins. "Good morning, Miss Langley," he called cheerfully. "And good morning to you too, Master Samuel." Tessa couldn't help but notice that Miles had shaved and wore a clean shirt under his vest. His hair was still damp from washing, and the scent of soap mingled pleasantly with the leather of his saddle as he helped her into the wagon. "I hope you don't mind the ride," he said, carefully arranging a blanket around Samuel as Tessa settled him on her lap. "It's about 4 miles to the ranch." The journey passed more pleasantly than Tessa had anticipated. Miles pointed out landmarks and shared stories about his travels before settling in Laredo. He had been a ranch hand in Montana, he explained, saving his money until he could afford a place of his own. "Why Texas?" Tessa asked, genuinely curious. Miles shrugged. "I followed a cattle drive down this way last year and liked the look of the country. When I heard old Davidson was looking to sell, it seemed like fate." The Davidson ranch came into view as they crested a small hill. It wasn't grand by any means, but the whitewashed farmhouse looked solid if neglected, with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Several outbuildings dotted the property, and a small herd of cattle grazed in a distant pasture. "It needs work," Miles admitted as they approached, "but it's good land with plenty of water. Davidson let things go in his last years." Tessa could see what he meant as they pulled up to the house. The paint was peeling, the garden overgrown, and the steps to the porch sagged slightly in the middle. "I've been focusing on the barn and fences," Miles explained, helping her down from the wagon. "Haven't had much time for the house yet." This became even more apparent when he led her inside. The main room was clean enough but sparsely furnished with mismatched pieces. A few crates served as tables, and the kitchen area was primitive at best. "I know it's not much to look at," Miles said, watching her face carefully, "but I've got plans. Just need to get things up and running properly first." Tessa set Samuel down on a braided rug and surveyed the space with a practical eye. "It has potential," she allowed. "Where would you like me to start?" Relief flooded Miles's features. "Honestly, anywhere you think best. I'm at your service today." They spent the morning cleaning and organizing. Miles proved to be a willing helper, following Tessa's instructions without complaint. By noon, the main room had been thoroughly swept and dusted, the windows washed, and the kitchen area scrubbed to a respectable shine. While Tessa prepared a simple meal from the supplies Miles had on hand, he entertained Samuel, showing remarkable patience with the child's endless curiosity. "You're good with him," Tessa remarked, watching as Miles built a tower of wooden blocks only for Samuel to knock it down with delighted giggles. "I like children," Miles replied simply. "Always hope to have a passel of my own someday. No wife waiting somewhere for you to establish a home." Miles shook his head. "No, madam, never found the right woman." His gaze met hers briefly before returning to Samuel. "Or maybe I just never stayed in one place long enough to look properly." The meal was a simple affair of beans, bacon, and biscuits, but Miles ate with such appreciation that Tessa felt a flush of pride. Afterward, she insisted on tackling the bedroom, which Miles had clearly been living out of suitcases and trunks. "You'll sleep better with things organized," she told him firmly when he protested that it wasn't necessary. By late afternoon, the house, while still plain, had undergone a remarkable transformation. Tessa stood in the main room, wiping her hands on her apron and surveying their work with satisfaction. "I can't thank you enough," Miles said, genuine gratitude in his voice. The place hasn't looked this good since, well, ever in my time here." "It was no trouble," Tessa replied, though her aching back suggested otherwise. "I should be getting Samuel home for his nap soon." Miles nodded and reached into his pocket, pulling out several coins. "Your wages, as promised." When Tessa saw the amount, her eyes widened. "This is too much, Mr. Lawson." "Miles," he corrected automatically. "And no, it's not nearly enough for the difference you've made. Would you consider coming back next Sunday?" Tessa hesitated, but the weight of the coins in her palm made the decision easier. "I suppose I could." "Excellent." Miles's smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. Same time, she agreed. The wagon ride back to town was quieter, with Samuel dozing against Tessa's shoulder and the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the landscape. Miles hummed softly under his breath, a tune Tessa didn't recognize but found soothing nonetheless. As they approached the outskirts of Laredo, Miles cleared his throat. "Miss Langley, Tessa, if I may." "Yes," she prompted when he fell silent. "I want you to know that I admire you," he said finally, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Raising a child on your own, working hard every day, that takes courage." Tessa stiffened. "I don't need pity, Mr. Lawson." "Miles," he corrected once more, this time with a gentle smile. "And it's not pity I'm offering. It's respect." The sincerity in his voice made something inside Tessa's chest ache. "Thank you," she whispered, unable to say more past the sudden lump in her throat. When they reached her lodgings, Miles insisted on carrying the still sleeping Samuel up the stairs while Tessa unlocked the door to her small room. She felt a momentary shame at the humble quarters, but Miles showed no reaction as he carefully placed Samuel in his crib. "Thank you again for today," he said quietly, standing awkwardly by the door. "I'll see you at the laundry with my shirts on Friday." Tessa nodded. "Yes, of course. And Sunday?" There was a hopeful note in his question that made Tessa's heart beat a little faster. "Yes, Sunday too." As Miles tipped his hat and departed, Tessa stood at her small window watching his wagon disappear down the street. For the first time in many months, she felt something like hope fluttering in her chest. She quickly tamped it down. Hope was a luxury she couldn't afford, especially when it came attached to a pair of kind blue eyes and a gentle smile. The following weeks established a routine. Miles would bring his laundry in on Fridays, always taking a moment to chat with Samuel and inquire about Tessa's week. On Sundays, his wagon would arrive promptly at 8, and Tessa would spend the day at the ranch, cleaning, cooking, and gradually bringing order to the house. With each passing week, Tessa found herself looking forward to Sundays more and more. Miles was unfailingly respectful and generous. He seemed genuinely interested in her opinions about improvements to the house, and implemented many of her suggestions. The peeling paint on the porch was scraped away and replaced with fresh white, the sagging steps repaired, and even curtains appeared at the windows after Tessa mentioned how much brightness they would add. Samuel, too, blossomed in the open spaces of the ranch. He took his first wobbling steps across the porch while Miles watched, clapping and cheering as enthusiastically as if the child were his own. It was on a particularly warm Sunday in August, nearly 2 months after their arrangement began, that things changed. Tessa had baked a blueberry pie, using berries Miles had purchased in town specifically because she'd mentioned once that they were her favorite. After dinner, they sat on the porch, watching the sunset while Samuel played with a small wooden horse Miles had carved for him. "I've been thinking," Miles said, breaking the comfortable silence between them, "about making some changes to the house." "Oh," Tessa took a sip of her coffee. "What kind of changes?" "Adding a room or two, maybe a proper nursery." Miles kept his gaze on the horizon. "And perhaps a larger kitchen," Tessa laughed softly. "Planning for the future, Mr. Lawson, Miles," he corrected, as he always did. Then, more seriously, "Yes, I am." Something in his tone made Tessa turn to look at him. The intensity in his blue eyes caused her breath to catch. "Tessa," he said quietly, "I've grown mighty fond of you and Samuel these past weeks." She felt her heart begin to race. "Mr. Lawson, please let me finish," he interrupted gently. "I know your situation. I know this town has been less than kind to you. I've heard the whispers when I'm in town, seen the way some folks look at you and that boy." Tessa's cheeks burned with shame, but Miles reached over and took her hand. "And every time I hear it or see it, I want to tell them all what I see. A brave, beautiful woman who loves her child more than anything in this world. A woman who works herself to exhaustion rather than give up on her boy." Tears pricked at Tessa's eyes. "It's very kind of you to say so." "It's not kindness, Tessa, it's truth." Miles squeezed her hand. "And the truth is, I've been falling in love with you both." The words hung in the air between them, as tangible as the golden sunset painting the sky. "You don't know what you're saying," Tessa whispered. "You don't know my past, what I've done." "I don't need to know," Miles interrupted. "Whatever happened before, whoever hurt you or left you alone, that's in the past. I'm interested in the future, our future, if you'll consider it." Tessa pulled her hand away, rising from her chair. "You can't mean that. A respectable rancher like yourself taking on a woman with a history like mine. The scandal would ruin you." Miles stood as well, his expression serious. "Do I strike you as a man who cares overmuch about what others think? You should," Tessa insisted. "This is your home now. These people, their good opinion mean nothing compared to how I feel about you and Samuel." Miles took a step closer. "Tessa, I'm not offering charity or pity. I'm offering a partnership. I want to be a father to that boy, a husband to you. I want us to build something together, right here." Samuel chose that moment to toddle over, raising his arms to Miles with a bright up. That broke the tension. Miles scooped him up automatically, settling the child on his hip with practiced ease. "See," Miles said softly, "he trusts me, can you?" Tessa looked at them together, the tall, strong man and her precious boy, and felt something within her crack open. I need time to think, Miles. This is all so unexpected." Miles nodded, his disappointment visible but restrained. "Of course. Take all the time you need. My feelings won't change." The ride back to town that evening was filled with a charged silence, broken only by Samuel's occasional babbling. At her door, Miles handed her the usual payment plus a small package wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" Tessa asked, confused. "Just a little something for Samuel," Miles replied. "And a reminder." After he left, Tessa unwrapped the package to find a small, intricately carved wooden box. Inside was a silver locket on a delicate chain. When she opened it, she found a tiny, carefully cut photograph of herself on one side. The other side was empty. A note tucked into the box read simply, "For the future, whatever you decide it holds." Tessa pressed the locket to her heart, tears streaming down her face as Samuel slept peacefully in his crib. Could she trust again? Could she believe that a man like Miles truly wanted her, past and all? The prospect was as terrifying as it was tempting. She didn't sleep that night, her mind racing with possibilities and fears. By morning, she had made no decision, but she tucked the locket into her dress pocket, the weight of it a constant reminder of the choice before her. The following Friday, Tessa's stomach knotted with anticipation as the hour approached when Miles typically brought in his laundry. But the door never jingled with his arrival. Mrs. Wilson noticed her distraction. "Expecting someone?" the older woman asked with a knowing smile. "No," Tessa lied, focusing on the shirt she was ironing. "Just tired today." Mrs. Wilson hummed skeptically but said nothing more, By closing time with still no sign of Miles, Tessa felt a growing sense of dismay. Had she offended him with her hesitation? Had he reconsidered his offer, Mrs. Wilson? She asked as they prepared to close the shop. Have you heard anything about Mr. Lawson today? The older woman's expression grew concerned. Now that you mention it, young Tom, who works at the livery, said Mr. Lawson rode in early this morning looking for the doctor. Apparently, he took a bad fall while fixing his roof yesterday. Tessa's heart lurched. Is he badly hurt? I don't rightly know, child, but Doc Sanders was seen heading out that way. That night, Tessa could barely focus on Samuel or her evening chores. Her mind kept returning to Miles, alone at his ranch, possibly seriously injured. By morning, she had made her decision. Using a portion of her savings, she hired a wagon to take her and Samuel out to the ranch. The driver, an elderly man named Mr. Clancy, who had always been kind to her, agreed to return for them in the late afternoon. The sight of the ranch brought a wave of relief. Smoke curled from the chimney, suggesting Miles was at least well enough to tend a fire. Tessa gathered Samuel and her basket of supplies and approached the house with trepidation. Her knock was answered by a groan and a muffled, "Come in." Miles was stretched out on the sofa, his left leg elevated on pillows and wrapped in bandages. His face, pale with pain, lit up with surprise and pleasure when he saw her. "Tessa, Samuel, what are you doing here? I heard you were hurt," she replied, setting Samuel down and hurrying to Miles's side. "What happened?" Miles grimaced. "Stupid accident. Lost my footing on the roof and came down hard. Broke my leg in 2 places, according to Doc Sanders." Tessa surveyed the room, noting the untidy state and the clearly hasty attempts at managing alone. "Have you eaten today?" "Tried to make some coffee," Miles admitted. Didn't get much further than that. Without another word, Tessa removed her shawl and rolled up her sleeves. "Well, it's fortunate I came prepared." She unpacked her basket, revealing a container of stew, fresh bread, and a small pie. "Let me heat this up for you." While the stew warmed on the stove, Tessa tidied the room and helped Miles into a more comfortable position. Samuel, delighted to be at the ranch, played contentedly with his wooden horse on the rug. "You didn't have to do this," Miles said softly as Tessa brought him a steaming bowl of stew. "But I'm mighty glad you did." "How are you managing alone?" Tessa asked, concern evident in her voice. Miles attempted a rueful smile. "Not very well, as you can see. Doc says I'll be off my feet for at least 6 weeks. I've sent for a ranch hand to help with the cattle and horses, but the house—" He trailed off, gesturing at the growing disarray. Tessa made a decision then, one that had perhaps been forming in her heart since she heard of his injury. "I'll come stay." Miles nearly choked on his stew. "What?" "I'll come stay and help you until you're back on your feet," Tessa clarified. "If the offer still stands." The hope that bloomed on Miles's face was almost painful to witness. "The offer stands, Tessa. It always will. But are you sure?" "What about the laundry?" "Mrs. Wilson can spare me for a few weeks," Tessa said with more confidence than she felt. "And it would only be until you're healed, to help you." Miles studied her face. "Just to help me." Tessa felt her cheeks warm. "For now, yes, the rest. I'm still thinking about the rest." The smile that spread across Miles's face was worth any uncertainty she felt. "That's fair enough. And I promise to be a model patient." "See that you are," Tessa replied with mock severity. "I won't tolerate any foolishness from you, Mr. Lawson." "Miles," he corrected automatically, and they both laughed, easing the tension between them. The next day, Tessa returned to town to make arrangements. Mrs. Wilson, far from being upset, seemed delighted by the development. "About time someone took care of that handsome cowboy," she remarked with a sly smile. "And if anyone asks, I'll tell them you're properly employed as his housekeeper during his convalescence." "Thank you," Tessa said, grateful for the older woman's understanding. "It's only until he's healed, Mrs." Wilson's knowing look suggested she believed otherwise, but she merely patted Tessa's hand. "Of course, dear. Just remember, sometimes the good Lord works in mysterious ways." The following afternoon, Tessa and Samuel moved into the ranch house. Miles insisted they take the main bedroom while he remained on the sofa, and Tessa was too practical to argue extensively. The arrangement made sense given his immobility. Life settled into a new routine. Tessa cooked, cleaned, and tended to Miles's needs during the day while Samuel explored his expanded surroundings with delight. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch if the weather allowed, or by the fire if it didn't, talking about everything and nothing. Miles never pressed Tessa about his proposal, though the question hung unspoken between them. Instead, he focused on getting to know her better, sharing stories from his past and drawing out hers in gentle increments. Slowly, Tessa began to open up. She told him about growing up in Ohio, the daughter of a prosperous merchant. About meeting Thomas, the handsome young cavalry officer who had promised her the world and then disappeared when she told him she was expecting his child. About her parents' ultimatum: give up the baby for adoption or leave their home forever. "I couldn't give him up," Tessa whispered, tears sliding down her cheeks as she recounted the painful memory. "He was all I had left." Miles reached for her hand across the small space between their chairs. "You did the right thing, Tessa. That boy is lucky to have a mother who loves him so fiercely." As the weeks passed, Miles's leg began to heal, and he grew restless with inactivity. Tessa found ways to keep him occupied, asking his advice about household matters and bringing him account books to review. Samuel, who had taken to calling Miles "My" since he couldn't manage the full name, became the rancher's constant companion, sitting beside him and helping with whatever task was at hand. The ranch hand Miles had hired, a taciturn older man named Hank, kept the livestock tended and reported to Miles daily. He raised an eyebrow at Tessa's presence initially, but made no comment beyond a gruff nod of acknowledgement. It was nearing the end of Miles's prescribed 6 weeks of rest when the first real test of their arrangement arrived in the form of Reverend Thompson and his wife, who drove out to the ranch one Sunday afternoon to check on the invalid. Tessa was in the kitchen when they arrived, and she froze at the sound of unfamiliar voices in the main room. Miles called for her, a note of warning in his voice that told her he understood her concern. "Tessa, we have visitors. The Reverend and Mrs. Thompson have come to call." Taking a deep breath, Tessa straightened her apron and stepped into the main room, Samuel trailing behind her with his wooden horse. Mrs. Thompson's eyebrows shot up at the sight of them, and Reverend Thompson's genial expression tightened slightly. "Miss Langley," he said, his tone carefully neutral, "I didn't realize you were here." "Miss Langley has been kind enough to help me during my recovery," Miles explained smoothly. "I'd have been in quite a fix without her assistance." "I see, Mrs." Thompson replied, her gaze sweeping the room and noting the obvious signs of Tessa and Samuel's residence: the child's toys, the woman's shawl draped over a chair. "How charitable of her!" The emphasis she placed on the word made its meaning clear, and Tessa felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. Miles's expression hardened. "Not charity, Mrs. Thompson, employment. I pay Miss Langley fair wages for her exceptional work." "Of course," Reverend Thompson interjected hastily, clearly trying to smooth over the awkward moment. "We're merely surprised, that's all. It's unusual for a single woman to reside in a bachelor's home, even in a professional capacity." "These are unusual circumstances," Miles replied, his tone cooling further. "And I assure you everything is perfectly proper." The visit was mercifully brief after that, with the Thompsons making transparent excuses about other calls they needed to make. As they departed, Mrs. Thompson paused at the door and turned to Tessa with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We missed seeing you at services today, Miss Langley." "Perhaps next Sunday. Thank you for the reminder, Mrs. Thompson," Tessa replied quietly. "Good day to you both." When they had gone, Miles banged his fist against the arm of the sofa in frustration. The nerve of those people. "Coming into my home, and they meant well," Tessa interrupted, though her own humiliation still burned. "And they're right. It isn't proper, my being here." Miles looked at her sharply. "Do you care what they think?" "I have to," Tessa replied, gathering Samuel into her arms for comfort. "For Samuel's sake, if not my own, he'll grow up in this community." Miles was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Then there's only one solution I can see." Tessa's heart sank. "Yes, I should return to town tomorrow. You're nearly healed now and marry me," Miles interrupted. Tessa stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What? Marry me?" he repeated, his blue eyes intense. "Not because of what those narrow-minded fools think, but because I love you. Because I love Samuel as if he were my own son. Because these weeks with you both have been the happiest of my life." "Miles," Tessa breathed, her heart racing. "You can't mean I've never meant anything more in my life." With visible effort and a grimace of pain, Miles maneuvered himself off the sofa and onto one knee before her, taking her free hand in his. "Tessa Langley, will you do me the great honor of becoming my wife? Will you let me be a father to Samuel and any other children we might be blessed with? Will you build a life with me here on this land?" Tears filled Tessa's eyes as she looked down at this man who had come into their lives like a sudden ray of sunshine after endless storm clouds. "Are you certain? Once done, it can't be undone. The town will talk. They'll say you only married me because— Let them talk," Miles said firmly. "I know the truth, and so will you. I'm asking because I want to wake up every morning for the rest of my life with you beside me. I want to see Samuel grow into a man and know I had a hand in raising him. I want us to be a family, Tessa." Samuel, sensing the importance of the moment, patted Miles's cheek with a chubby hand. "My," he said solemnly, then added a word that made both adults freeze in astonishment. "Papa." It was the first time he had said it, and the timing couldn't have been more perfect. Tessa looked from her son to the man kneeling before them, his face alight with joy and hope, and felt the last of her resistance crumble. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly. "Yes, Miles Lawson, I will marry you." Miles let out a whoop of delight and pulled her down into an embrace that included Samuel, who giggled at the sudden commotion. Then, with tender reverence, Miles cupped Tessa's face in his hands and kissed her their first kiss, sweet and full of promise. "I love you," he murmured against her lips. "Both of you, more than I can say." "And we love you," Tessa replied, finally allowing herself to believe in the future opening before them. "My wonderful, stubborn cowboy." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the ranch with only Mrs. Wilson, Hank, and Dr. Sanders as witnesses. Reverend Thompson had been reluctant to perform the ceremony until Miles had a private conversation with him, the contents of which he refused to divulge to Tessa, beyond saying that the good Reverend saw reason. The town's reaction was mixed, as expected. Some, like Mrs. Holbrook, sniffed disapprovingly and muttered about making honest women out of fallen doves. Others, particularly those who had dealt with Miles and found him to be a fair and forthright businessman, were more accepting. Tessa found, to her surprise, that Miles had been right. The opinions of others mattered far less than she had feared. Their happiness was a shield against judgment, and as the months passed, even the most disapproving began to accept the new Mrs. Lawson as a permanent fixture. The following spring, Miles finally implemented his plans to expand the house, adding 2 new bedrooms and enlarging the kitchen just as he had proposed on that fateful day on the porch. Tessa, her belly beginning to round with their second child, supervised the work with exacting standards that made the carpenters both respect and fear her. Samuel, now approaching his 2nd birthday, followed Miles everywhere, a miniature shadow in tiny boots that Miles had specially ordered from the cobbler in town. The boy called him Papa without hesitation now, and the love between them was as real and deep as any biological bond could have been. It was a warm evening in late May, with the scent of blooming wildflowers drifting through the open windows, when Tessa finally opened the silver locket Miles had given her so many months ago. She had worn it every day since their wedding but had left the second side empty, unsure what belonged there. Miles found her sitting on their bed, the locket open in her palm. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" he asked, sitting beside her and wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Tessa leaned into his embrace. "I was wondering what should go in the empty side." Miles kissed her temple. "I always figured it would be a picture of Samuel or perhaps our new little one when they arrive." "That's just it," Tessa said slowly. "I've been thinking about family, about what makes one real." "And what conclusion have you reached, Mrs. Lawson?" Miles asked, his hand dropping to caress her growing belly. Tessa closed the locket and turned to face her husband. "I think a family isn't about blood or names or what others see when they look at us. It's about love, about choosing each other every day." Miles's eyes softened. "That's a mighty fine definition." "So I've decided," Tessa continued, "that the empty side should remain empty for now, as a reminder that our family is still growing, still becoming what it's meant to be." "I like that idea," Miles murmured, drawing her closer for a kiss. "Room for the future." Outside, the sun was setting over the land they now shared, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Samuel's laughter drifted in from where he played on the porch with the wooden horse that had become his constant companion. The new rooms of the house stood ready to welcome more laughter, more life, more love. Tessa Langley Lawson, once shamed and shunned, now found herself surrounded by a bounty she had never dared to dream possible. As Miles's arms tightened around her, she sent a silent prayer of gratitude into the gathering dusk, for second chances, for brave cowboys with kind eyes, for love that saw beyond judgment to the heart of what truly mattered. And in that moment, she knew with absolute certainty that whatever the future held, whatever new joys or challenges awaited them, they would face it together, as a family built not from obligation or circumstance, but from choice. The most powerful choice of all, love. 2 years later, the Lawson Ranch had blossomed into one of the most prosperous in the county. Miles's careful management and Tessa's shrewd advice had expanded their cattle operation, and they had recently added a small horse breeding program that showed great promise. The house, once neglected and bare, now stood proud with fresh paint, thriving gardens, and the unmistakable warmth of a cherished home. Samuel, now 4 and fiercely protective of his younger brother James, who had arrived healthy and strong just as the house additions were completed, raced across the yard with the energy only a young boy could possess. Behind him toddled James, determined to keep up with his older brother despite his still wobbly legs. "Don't go too far," Tessa called from the porch, where she sat shelling peas with Mrs. Wilson, who had retired from the laundry business and now spent several days a week with the family she had come to consider her own. "They're fine," Mrs. Wilson assured her with a chuckle. Boys need room to run. Tessa smiled, acknowledging the truth in the older woman's words. Her gaze drifted to where Miles was working in the corral, breaking a spirited young mare. His shirt clung to his back with sweat, and his movements were confident and gentle as he worked with the nervous animal. Even after 2 years of marriage, the sight of him still made her heart skip a beat. As if sensing her gaze, Miles looked up and tipped his hat to her with a grin that promised later intimacies. Tessa felt her cheeks warm and returned to her task, ignoring Mrs. Wilson's knowing chuckle. "That man loves you something fierce," the older woman remarked. "Never seen a match more right than you two." "I'm blessed," Tessa agreed softly. The sound of an approaching wagon drew their attention to the road. Miles looked up as well, calling to Hank to take over with the mare while he walked toward the house, arriving just as the wagon pulled up. To Tessa's surprise, it was Reverend Thompson and his wife. Along with another couple, she didn't recognize a distinguished-looking older gentleman and a severe-faced woman in expensive but outdated clothing. "Afternoon, Reverend Mrs. Thompson," Miles greeted them, removing his hat. "What brings you out our way?" Reverend Thompson cleared his throat, looking uncharacteristically uncomfortable. "Mr. Lawson, Mrs. Lawson, these people have come a long way to speak with you. May I present Mr. and Mrs. Langley from Ohio?" Tessa felt as though all the air had been sucked from her lungs. Her parents. Here, after nearly 5 years of silence, Miles was immediately at her side, his hand finding hers and squeezing gently. "You're welcome to come inside," he said, his tone cordial but guarded. "I believe we have much to discuss." Mrs. Wilson, understanding the gravity of the moment, quietly gathered the boys and took them to the barn to see the new kittens, giving the family privacy for what promised to be a difficult conversation. Inside, Tessa moved mechanically, offering refreshments that her mother declined with a sniff but her father accepted with a polite nod. When they were all seated, an uncomfortable silence fell over the group. "Well," Reverend Thompson said finally, "I'll leave you folks to your reunion. Mrs. Thompson and I just wanted to make the introductions, given the circumstances." After the Thompsons departed, the silence grew even heavier until Mr. Langley cleared his throat. "You look well, Tessa," he said, his voice gruff with suppressed emotion. "I am well," she replied, finding her voice at last. "Very well, in fact." Mrs. Langley's lips thinned. "We had to learn of your marriage through acquaintances. You couldn't have written to inform us." Miles's hand tightened on Tessa's. "Given that you disowned your daughter for choosing to keep her child, I'm not sure what right you have to such courtesies," he said evenly. Mr. Langley winced, but Mrs. Langley's expression hardened further. "We were protecting our family's reputation." Tessa knew the consequences of her actions. "Yes, I did," Tessa said quietly, "and I would make the same choice again. Samuel is the greatest blessing of my life alongside my husband and our younger son." "You have another child?" Mr. Langley asked, a flicker of interest crossing his austere features. Tessa nodded. "James. He's nearly 2 now." An awkward silence fell again until Miles spoke. "I don't mean to be inhospitable, but I'd like to understand the purpose of your visit. You've traveled a long way after years of no contact." Mr. Langley exchanged a glance with his wife before answering. "We're getting older. Mortality has a way of clarifying one's priorities. We wanted to see our daughter again and to meet our grandsons. After 5 years of pretending I don't exist," Tessa's voice trembled slightly. "After forcing me to choose between my child and my family, Mrs. Langley's composure cracked slightly. "We were wrong," she admitted, the words clearly difficult for her. "Not about the impropriety of your situation then, but about cutting you off completely." "What your mother means," Mr. Langley interjected, "is that we've missed you." And as time passed, we began to wonder about the child, about Samuel. Tessa felt tears threatening and blinked them back. He's a wonderful boy, smart, kind, curious about everything. Miles has been a true father to him in every way that matters. Miles nodded, his expression solemn. I consider Samuel my son, Mr. Langley. He bears my name now, legally and in my heart. We understand, Mr. Langley said, and we respect that. We're not here to disrupt your family, Tessa. We just want a chance to know you again, all of you. Tessa looked at her parents, her father's face lined with regret, her mother's proud posture belying the moisture in her eyes, and felt the weight of 5 years of hurt and abandonment press against her chest. She then looked to Miles, whose steady gaze conveyed his unwavering support for whatever she decided. I can't pretend the past didn't happen, Tessa said finally. You hurt me deeply, but I've learned something important in these years with Miles, that family is about more than blood. It's about choosing each other even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult. Mrs. Langley's rigid posture softened almost imperceptibly. We've made many mistakes, Tessa, but we're asking for a chance to make amends. Not just with me, Tessa said firmly. With my sons, both of them. And with my husband. We are a package, the 4 of us. We understand, Mr. Langley replied, and we're willing to try if you'll allow it. Miles squeezed Tessa's hand once more. Perhaps we could start by introducing you to your grandsons, he suggested. They should be finished admiring those kittens by now. The meeting between the elder Langleys and their grandsons was tentative at first. Samuel, ever curious, approached with cautious interest, while James clung to Miles's leg, peering out with wide eyes at these unfamiliar people. Mrs. Langley's composure crumbled entirely when Samuel solemnly presented her with a small wildflower he had picked. For you, he said. Mama says flowers make people smile. Your mama is very wise, Mrs. Langley replied, her voice thick with emotion as she accepted the humble gift. Over dinner, the conversation gradually eased into less fraught territory. Mr. Langley expressed genuine interest in the ranch operations, while Mrs. Langley surprised Tessa by complimenting her garden and asking for her recipe for the rabbit stew they were enjoying. As the evening drew to a close, plans were made for the elder Langleys to stay in town for another week, with arrangements to visit the ranch again in a few days. The goodbye at the door was awkward but held a promise that hadn't been there when they arrived. After they had departed and the boys were tucked into bed, Tessa found herself sitting on the porch swing with Miles, her head resting on his shoulder as they watched the stars emerge in the darkening sky. You were magnificent today, Miles murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. So strong, so gracious. I learned from the best, Tessa replied, tilting her face up to kiss him properly. You've shown me every day what true acceptance looks like. Miles smiled against her lips. Are you glad they came? Tessa considered the question carefully. I think I am. Not for what was, but for what might be. For Samuel and James to know their grandparents, for healing old wounds. That's my wise wife, Miles said, pulling her closer against the evening chill, always looking toward the future. They sat in companionable silence for a while longer, the gentle creaking of the swing blending with the night sounds of the ranch, distant lowing of cattle, the soft whickering of horses in the barn, the rustle of wind through the cottonwoods. You ever regret it? Tessa asked suddenly. Taking on another man's child. All the whispers and judgment that came with marrying me. Miles turned to face her fully, his blue eyes serious in the lamplight spilling from the window. Not for one single moment. You and those boys are the best things that ever happened to me, Tessa Lawson. I thank God every day that I was fool enough to ruin my shirts just to have an excuse to visit the laundry. Tessa laughed softly. You didn't really. Miles's grin was boyish. "I might have been a bit more careless with my washing than necessary. Had to have some reason to see that pretty laundress with the sweet baby boy, didn't I?" "You are a schemer, Miles Lawson," Tessa said, her heart full to bursting with love for this man. "Only when it comes to things worth scheming for," he replied, drawing her into his arms for a deeper kiss that held all the passion and tenderness of their years together. Above them, a shooting star blazed briefly across the heavens, a fleeting reminder of how quickly life could change, how precious each moment was. Tessa, once alone and afraid, now surrounded by love on all sides, silently thanked that star for guiding her to this place, this man, this life. Not because it had been easy, not because it had been without pain or judgment or struggle, but because through it all, she had found the courage to choose love. And in that choice, she had found everything she never knew. She needed a partner who saw her strength rather than her shame, children who filled her days with wonder, and a home built on acceptance rather than appearances. In the years to come, the Lawson Ranch would continue to flourish. The relationship with Tessa's parents would grow, slowly and sometimes painfully, into something new and precious. Samuel would grow tall and strong under Miles's guidance, eventually taking his place as a partner in the ranch operations. James would develop his mother's keen mind and his father's gentle way with animals. And they would be joined by a sister, Elizabeth, born on a snowy winter night 3 years later, completing their family circle. But all of that lay in the future, waiting to unfold. For now, on this quiet evening under the Texas stars, Tessa was content to simply be held by her cowboy, the man who had seen past her circumstances to her heart, who had offered to be a father to her child when others only offered judgment, who had chosen love when others chose condemnation. "I love you, Miles Lawson," she whispered against his chest, feeling his heart beat strong and steady beneath her cheek. "And I love you, Tessa Lawson," he replied, his voice carrying all the certainty of a vow renewed. Now and always. Together they sat, watching the stars wheel overhead. Two souls who had found in each other the courage to defy expectation, to rewrite the rules, and to build a family founded not on convention, but on the most powerful force of all, a love that saw beyond shame, to the beautiful truth of second chances.